My daughter-in-law had no idea I owned the law firm where she worked. Seeing my simple clothes, she invited me to dinner with her parents to show off. Mid-meal, she slid an envelope across the table and sneered, "Take this money and move out. You don't belong in this house anymore." I quietly pocketed it. 5 minutes later, she realized in horror that she had just signed her own ticket to prison. "Thank you so much for joining Dad's Revenge Stories. I appreciate every single one of you. Let me know in the comments which city or country are you watching this from." Note this narrative features fictionalized details for creative and educational purposes. Similarities to actual names or events are coincidental, but the message carries clear value. The roses along the south fence were the first things I tended every morning. Not because they demanded the most attention, but because Clara had planted them the spring before she got sick. Pale pink climbers that she coaxed up the wooden lattice with a patience I had never fully understood until she was gone. Now I understood it completely. I coaxed them the same way, slowly, carefully, with both hands in the dirt before the rest of California had finished its first cup of coffee. I was 68 years old, and this garden was the only courtroom I still entered willingly. My name is Arthur Whitmore. 40 years ago, I founded Whitmore and Associates from a rented office the size of a janitor's closet in downtown Los Angeles. I had one desk, one telephone, and a conviction that the law practiced with absolute integrity could change a person's life. I was right. Over the following 3 decades, Whitmore and Associates grew into one of the most respected legal firms in California. 12 floors of glass and steel in Century City. Over 200 attorneys. Clients whose names appeared on the sides of hospital wings and university libraries. 10 years ago, after Clara passed, I walked away from all of it. Not because I had lost the love of the law. I lost something far more important than that. I lost the person who had made all of it worth building. Clara had sat in the front row of every victory I ever argued. She had held my hand through every loss. Without her, the office felt like a stage after the audience had gone home. Empty, echoing, pointless. I signed the management over to my oldest friend, Stephen Hartley, placed my controlling ownership into a blind trust that kept my name entirely off the public registry, and moved back into the house where Daniel had grown up. The house where Clara had grown her roses. I became to the outside world a retired old man with dirt under his fingernails and nowhere important to be. That was exactly what I wanted them to think. I pressed 2 fingers into the soil around the base of the climbing rose nearest the fence and felt the moisture level with the same focus I used to direct at jury pools. Dry in the middle. The California heat had pulled the water down too fast. I reached for the copper watering can beside my knee and worked slowly from the roots outward. I heard the car before I saw it. A silver German sedan, brand new, pulling into the driveway with the particular confidence of someone who had never once worried about a car payment. The engine cut. A door opened, then another. I did not look up from the roses. The footsteps on the driveway moved with the quick, purposeful rhythm of a woman who believed her time was too valuable to waste. I had heard that rhythm in conference rooms for decades. It always belonged to the same kind of person. Nicole Hargrove Whitmore was 34 years old and a senior associate at the firm I had built with my bare hands. She did not know that. As far as Nicole was concerned, her late father-in-law's old friend Stephen Hartley ran Whitmore and Associates, and the firm's mysterious original founder was a vague historical footnote who had retired long before she joined. She had never once asked what had happened to him. That told me everything I needed to know about her. "Daniel, the hydrangeas are getting leggy again," she called back toward the car, her voice carrying that crisp, clipped tone she reserved for observations she expected to be treated as orders. "Someone really needs to deal with the landscaping situation." She said the word someone the way people say it when they mean someone beneath me. I was kneeling 4 feet away from her, wearing my old canvas work gloves and a flannel shirt with a frayed left cuff. She looked directly at me and through me in the same half-second, the way you look through a piece of furniture that has always been in the same corner. Her eyes moved to her phone before she had fully processed that I was a human being and not a garden ornament. "Good morning, Nicole," I said. She startled slightly, not with guilt, with the mild, impatient irritation of someone interrupted by the help. "Oh," she said. "Arthur." The name came out with the particular flatness of someone using a word they find faintly distasteful. "I didn't see you down there." Down there. I was kneeling in my own garden in front of my own home tending roses my wife had planted before Nicole Hargrove had passed her bar exam. "The soil is dry on the south side," I said pleasantly. "The Santa Ana winds take the moisture out faster than people expect." Nicole's eyes returned to her phone. She said. Daniel came around the front of the car carrying 2 bags of groceries and wearing the slightly rushed expression he had adopted over the past 18 months. My son was 37 years old, a good attorney, and a man who had somewhere along the way learned to walk at his wife's pace rather than his own. "Hey, Dad." He leaned down and squeezed my shoulder quickly, warmly, but already straightening before the gesture was fully complete. Already checking to see if Nicole had noticed the pause. She had moved toward the front door without waiting for him. "She has a conference call at 9, Daniel said to me in a lower voice by way of explanation or perhaps apology. "Of course she does," I said. I watched my son follow his wife into the house. I watched the front door close. I turned back to the roses and worked the water slowly around the roots the way Clara had shown me, moving in a careful circle, so the moisture reached every part of the root system evenly. Clara had always said that the things you neglect at the roots will eventually show up at the surface. You could not hide poor foundations in a garden. Everything that was wrong underground found its way to the light eventually. I sat back on my heels and looked at the closed front door of the house I had built. I had spent 30 years learning to read people before they said a single word. I could tell from the angle of a witness's shoulders whether they were about to lie. I could feel the shift in a room's energy the moment a jury had made up its mind. Nicole Hargrove had walked past me like I was part of the furniture. She had no idea she was standing in the garden of the man who owned every corner of the world she was so desperate to climb. Dinner in my house had never been a quiet affair when Clara was alive. She believed that a meal without conversation was just fuel, and fuel was for machines. She would drag stories out of Daniel before he had finished unfolding his napkin. She would ask my clients about their childhoods when they came to Sunday dinners, not about their cases. She made every person at her table feel like the most interesting person in the room. Nicole set the table the way a hotel conference coordinator sets up for a client presentation. Precisely, efficiently, without warmth. The forks were aligned to the millimeter. The water glasses had been filled exactly halfway. She had brought prepared food from a restaurant in Brentwood, arranged on our old ceramic serving dishes to give the impression she had cooked. I recognized the packaging because I had ordered from the same place myself twice in the years after Clara died, when grief made cooking feel like an insult to the silence. I said nothing about the packaging. I unfolded my napkin, placed it in my lap, and watched. Nicole had changed out of her work clothes into what I could only describe as a carefully selected casual outfit, the kind that costs $400 and is designed to look effortless. Her hair was down. She touched Daniel's arm twice before we sat. She refilled my water glass without being asked and said, "There you go, Arthur." With a smile so practiced, it belonged on a billboard. This was the performance. I had seen it before in witnesses who were lying and knew exactly what they were doing. "How is the garden coming along?" Daniel asked me, cutting into a piece of chicken that had definitely been braised by a professional chef in a commercial kitchen. "The roses on the south fence need more water in this heat," I said. "The root systems are deeper than they look. They need more attention than most people give them." I watched Nicole's smile stay perfectly in place, while her eyes moved to her phone screen, which was resting face up beside her fork. A small notification lit the screen. She tilted it slightly away from Daniel without looking like she was tilting it away from Daniel. It was a practiced adjustment no more than 2 inches executed with the casual fluency of long habit. I read the name on the screen before she completed the tilt. Ryan. "Nicole," Daniel said, nodding toward the phone. Sorry. She flipped it face down with a light laugh that said, "This is a harmless inconvenience and nothing more." "The Kellerman deposition prep. You know how it is with the big cases. They follow you home." "I thought the Kellerman file was assigned to the Harrison team," I said pleasantly. Nicole's fork paused for exactly 1/2 second before completing its arc toward her plate. A pause so brief that Daniel did not register it. But I had spent decades watching witnesses for exactly that kind of pause. It was the pause that happened when an unexpected question arrived faster than the prepared answer. "It was," she said smoothly. "They pulled me in for second chair support last week. It happens." "Of course," I said. She excused herself to take a call 10 minutes later, slipping into the kitchen with the particular casualness of someone who had done this many times before. I heard the refrigerator open and close, a gesture designed to explain why she was in the kitchen, followed by a voice dropped so low it was almost inaudible. Almost. I had spent 3 decades in courtrooms, where everything depended on hearing exactly what people did not want you to hear. My hearing was sharper than Nicole had any reason to expect from a 68-year-old man who spent his mornings talking to roses. I caught 4 words clearly through the kitchen door. "Not here. Tomorrow night." Daniel was telling me about a case he was working on, something involving a commercial lease dispute in Pasadena. He was animated about it, leaning forward the way he used to lean forward at the dinner table as a boy when he had something he was proud of. I kept my eyes on his face and my attention on the kitchen doorway. Nicole returned 2 minutes and 40 seconds later. I know the exact duration because I counted. She set a glass of water she did not need on the table beside her plate, sat down and redirected her smile at Daniel with a warmth so immediate it should have seemed impossible after whatever conversation had just taken place in my kitchen. "Sorry, babe. Tell me about the Pasadena case." She reached across and put her hand over his. "I want to hear all of it." Daniel's face opened up the way it used to when his mother praised his report cards. I watched my son look at his wife like she was the most attentive person in the world. I watched Nicole look back at him with eyes that were already somewhere else entirely. There is a specific kind of grief that arrives not with the death of a person, but with the death of an illusion. It settles into your chest like cold water and stays there heavy and still. I had felt it once before, standing in a hospital corridor in Cedars-Sinai watching a doctor's face before he had said a single word about Clara. I felt it again now, because my son was sitting 3 feet away from me, proud and happy and completely blind, and the woman holding his hand had just spent 2 minutes and 40 seconds in my kitchen, making plans I was not supposed to know about. I picked up my fork. I finished my dinner. I asked Daniel about the Pasadena case and listened to every word he said, and I began for the first time to understand exactly what kind of trouble had moved into my house. I found the first dead rose on a Tuesday morning. It was the climber nearest the south gate, the one Clara had named Eleanor after her grandmother. The leaves had gone from deep green to the particular yellow-brown that meant the root system had been chemically disrupted, not simply dried out. I had been watering that plant every morning for 10 years. I knew its rhythms the way I knew my own heartbeat. This was not drought damage. This was not disease. I crouched down and pressed 2 fingers into the soil at the base of the stem. The earth smelled wrong. Beneath the familiar scent of California clay and organic mulch, there was something sharp and synthetic. Something that did not belong. I had spent enough years in environmental litigation to recognize herbicide contamination when I smelled it. I sat back on my heels and looked down the length of the south fence. 3 more climbers showed the same yellowing at the lower leaves. The damage was recent within the last 48 hours, and it was concentrated along the fence line closest to the side gate that Nicole used when she came through from the driveway. My chest tightened with a specific kind of anger I had not felt in a long time. Not the hot, reactive anger of a man caught off guard. The cold, deliberate anger of a man who has just found the first piece of evidence in a case he did not know he was building. Clara had planted Eleanor the spring Daniel turned 4 years old. She had chosen the variety from a catalog she kept on the nightstand, folding down the corner of the page for 3 weeks, before she finally ordered the bare root cutting. She had carried that plant home from the post office herself, wrapped in damp newspaper, talking to it the whole drive back like it was a new member of the family. Eleanor had survived 2 droughts, 1 unusually hard frost, and the worst Santa Ana wind season in a decade. She had not survived Nicole Hargrove. I stood up slowly and walked the length of the fence with my hands behind my back, the way I used to walk the length of a courtroom when I needed to think without showing the jury that I was thinking. Methodical, unhurried, taking inventory. By the time I reached the north corner, I had counted 7 affected plants. The pattern was too consistent to be accidental. Someone had moved along this fence line with deliberate purpose, applying something to the soil at the base of each plant, spacing the applications, evenly, working quickly enough not to be seen. I walked back to the potting shed at the rear of the garden and pulled out the small metal lockbox I kept on the 3rd shelf behind the clay pots. Inside was a spare house key, Clara's original garden journal, and a small digital recorder I had purchased 3 years ago after a neighbor's property dispute had turned unpleasant. And I had learned once again that documentation was the only language the law fully trusted. I set the recorder on the shelf and looked at it for a long moment. Then I went inside to make coffee, and while the coffee brewed, I walked through the living room and found exactly what I had suspected I would find. The camera was mounted behind the upper left corner of the bookcase near the front window. Small, wireless, the kind sold at any electronics retailer for under $200, positioned at an angle that covered the main sitting area and the hallway leading to the kitchen. Someone had pushed 3 of Clara's ceramic figures slightly forward on the shelf to conceal the lens. I stood in the center of the room and looked at it for a long time. My son had put a surveillance camera in my home. In the home where he had learned to walk. Where I had read him bedtime stories until he was old enough to be embarrassed by it. Where his mother had died in the back bedroom with both of us holding her hands. I reached up and took the ceramic figures down one by one, setting them carefully on the side table. I looked directly into the lens for 3 full seconds. Then I picked the camera up, examined the mounting bracket, and repositioned it with the same careful precision I had used for 30 years when preparing a case for trial. I turned it 45 degrees to the left. Now it covered the side hallway, the door to the back garden, and the section of the living room nearest the display cabinet, where Clara's antique collection was arranged on 2 glass shelves. The Wedgwood pieces she had spent 20 years acquiring one careful purchase at a time. The small Tiffany lamp she had inherited from her mother. The hand-painted music box from our first anniversary trip to San Francisco. I replaced the ceramic figures in front of the lens exactly as they had been. Then I poured my coffee, carried it out to the garden bench, and sat down in the morning sun with my hands wrapped around the warm ceramic mug. If someone wanted to watch what happened in my home, I was happy to give them a front row seat. I just needed to make sure the camera was pointed at the right part of the stage. That night at 11:47, the motion sensor on the repositioned camera activated. I know the exact time because the recording timestamp is burned into my memory as clearly as any exhibit number from any case I ever tried. The footage showed a figure moving through the side hallway toward the garden door, carrying something in their right hand. The kitchen light was off. The figure moved with the careful, deliberate step of someone who believed they were completely unobserved. They pushed open the garden door and stepped outside. I watched the recording the following morning with my coffee going cold beside me and my hands completely still on the tabletop. The garden had remembered exactly what I needed it to remember. The footage was worse than I expected. I had prepared myself sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open and my coffee going cold for something uncomfortable. What I had not prepared myself for was how methodical she was. Nicole entered through the side garden door at 11:47 exactly as the timestamp confirmed. She was wearing dark clothing and carried a small spray bottle in her right hand, the kind sold at garden supply stores for applying liquid fertilizer. She moved along the south fence without hesitation, without looking back toward the house, without any of the nervous glancing that characterized someone acting against their conscience. She had no conscience about this. That much was clear. She worked from left to right, crouching at the base of each climbing rose and applying a fine mist directly into the soil around the roots. Her movements were practiced, efficient. She had done research before she came out here. She knew exactly how much to apply and exactly where to apply it, so the damage would look like root disease rather than deliberate contamination. When she reached Clara's Eleanor, she paused. She straightened up and looked at the plant for a moment. Then she applied twice the amount she had used on the others. I closed the laptop. I sat at my kitchen table and breathed through the rage that moved through my chest like a physical force. Not because Nicole Hargrove had poisoned my garden. Gardens could be replanted. Not even because she had done it with such practiced, remorseless efficiency. She had paused at Eleanor. She had looked at that specific rose and chosen to do more damage, which meant she knew. Somehow she knew that one mattered more than the others. She had targeted it deliberately, the way a skilled attorney targets the most valuable piece of evidence when they cannot win on the merits of the case. I had trained attorneys for 30 years. I recognized the instinct. I opened the laptop again and advanced the footage forward. 20 minutes after Nicole returned to the house, the recording showed her back inside in the hallway near Clara's display cabinet. She picked up the hand-painted music box from the second shelf, turned it over to examine the base, and carried it under her arm toward the front of the house. She did not put it back. I pressed pause. The music box had been a gift. Clara purchased herself on our first anniversary trip to San Francisco. A small, ridiculous, beautiful thing with a painted harbor scene on the lid and a mechanism inside that played the first 8 bars of a Chopin nocturne. Clara had wound it every Sunday morning for 31 years. After she died, I wound it myself. Every Sunday, without exception. I picked up my phone and called Stephen Hartley. He answered on the second ring, the way he always had, even at 7:40 in the morning, even after 30 years of friendship that had never once required explanation or preamble. "Arthur," he said. "I need you to start pulling files," I said. Everything connected to Nicole Hargrove. Employment records, billing history, client assignments, expense reports. All of it. There was a brief pause, the kind Stephen used when he was shifting from one mode of thinking to another. Not hesitation. Recalibration. "How far back?" he asked. From the day she joined the firm, I said. 3 years. Are we talking internal review or are we building something? I looked at the paused image on my laptop screen. Nicole's hand around Clara's music box. Her face angled slightly downward, focused, purposeful. We are building something, I said. I want documentation on everything. Financial irregularities, client conflicts, anything that does not line up. I want Chloe to start a quiet audit of the charitable trust accounts as well. Specifically any withdrawals or transfers in the past 6 months. Chloe is already running some numbers, Stephen said carefully. She flagged something last week that she wanted to discuss with you directly. I told her to wait until she had the full picture. I sat up straighter in my chair. What kind of something? I asked. The kind that involves the Whitmore Family Charitable Foundation accounts, Stephen said. Arthur, there are withdrawals that do not correspond to any approved grant distributions. 11 transactions over 4 months. Small enough not to trigger the automatic oversight threshold. Large enough in aggregate to matter considerably. The cold in my chest spread downward into my stomach. The Whitmore Family Charitable Foundation had been Clara's project. She had spent 6 years building it into an organization that funded legal aid clinics across Southern California. It was the most direct living extension of everything she had believed about the law and about the responsibility that came with having more than you needed. Someone had been stealing from Clara's foundation. Don't tell Chloe to pull everything, I said. My voice came out steady. Decades of courtroom practice will do that for a man even when his hands are shaking against the edge of a kitchen table. I want the complete picture before the end of the week. Every transaction, every authorization, every digital fingerprint. Understood, Stephen said. Arthur, how bad is this going to get? I looked at the frozen image on my screen one final time, then closed the laptop firmly. It is already bad, I said. We are just now finding out exactly how bad. I ended the call and placed the phone face down on the table. Outside the kitchen window, the south garden was quiet in the early morning light. The 7 damaged roses stood along the fence, their leaves beginning to curl at the edges with the particular resignation of something that has been hurt past the point of easy recovery. I stood up, carried my cold coffee to the sink and poured it out. Then I put the kettle on and began to think like the attorney I had never in 40 years actually stopped being. The 12th floor of Whitmore and Associates looked exactly the way I had designed it to look 30 years ago. I had wanted the associates to feel the weight of the work when they walked in every morning. Not the weight of corporate ambition or billable hours, but the weight of responsibility. The responsibility that came with holding other people's problems in your hands and being trusted not to drop them. Dark wood paneling. Natural light from floor-to-ceiling windows facing west toward the Pacific. No artwork on the walls except a single framed copy of the California Rules of Professional Conduct, mounted beside the main conference room door. Clara had laughed at that when I installed it. She had said it was the most Arthur Whitmore thing she had ever seen in her life. I took the elevator to the 12th floor on a Thursday morning 3 days after my call with Stephen. I had not been inside this building in over a year. The security guard at the lobby desk, a young man named Marcus with a firm handshake and a crease in his uniform so sharp it could have cut paper, recognized me immediately. His eyes went wide for exactly 1 second before professional composure reasserted itself. "Mr. Whitmore," he said. "Good morning, sir." "Good morning, Marcus," I said. "I will be using the private conference room on 12 today." "Yes, sir. I will let Mr. Hartley know you are on your way up." I rode the elevator alone. The doors opened onto the 12th floor, and I stood in the entrance for a moment, taking in the controlled activity of a busy legal office. attorneys moving between offices with files tucked under their arms, the low murmur of telephone calls coming from behind closed doors, the particular focused energy of people who understood that the work they were doing mattered. Then I saw Chloe Bennett at her desk near the east window and understood watching her exactly why I had trusted her with this. She was 29 years old, a paralegal with a graduate degree in forensic accounting that most of the attorneys in this building did not know she possessed. I had hired her 5 years ago not because of her paralegal credentials, which were excellent, but because of the way she had answered a single question during her interview. I had asked her what she would do if she discovered that a senior attorney at the firm was behaving unethically toward a client. She had not hesitated for even a fraction of a second. "I would document everything first," she had said. "Then I would go directly to whoever owned the controlling interest in this firm. Not HR, not the managing partner. The owner." I had offered her the position before she finished the sentence. She looked up from her monitor as I crossed the floor toward her. Her expression did not change, which was itself a kind of answer. She had been expecting me. She closed the file on her screen with a single keystroke, picked up a dark blue folder from the corner of her desk, and stood up. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "the conference room is ready." We sat across from each other at the long table with the Pacific visible through the west windows, the water flat and silver in the morning light. Chloe opened the blue folder and laid the first page in front of me without preamble. I had always appreciated that about her. She understood that unnecessary words were a form of disrespect toward serious information. 11 transactions, she said, over a period of 4 months. Each one falls below the $10,000 threshold that triggers mandatory review under the Foundation's internal oversight protocol. The largest single withdrawal is $9,800. The smallest is $4,200. "Total?" I asked. $63,400, she said. Removed from the Whitmore Family Charitable Foundation operating account and transferred in each case to an external account registered to a company called Pacific Meridian Consulting. "And Pacific Meridian Consulting," I asked. Chloe turned to the second page. "Does not exist as a functioning business entity," she said. "It was registered as an LLC in Nevada 14 months ago. The registered agent is a formation service that processes hundreds of shell companies per year. The listed manager of record is a man named Thomas Greer, who I have confirmed is a distant cousin of Nicole Hargrove's mother. He has no legal or financial background." I looked at the page for a long moment. The numbers were precise and clean in the way that deliberately constructed fraud always was. The people who did this kind of thing were not sloppy. Sloppiness was for amateurs. This was the work of someone who understood exactly how oversight systems functioned and had engineered each transaction to slide beneath every automatic detection threshold. "There is more," Chloe said. She turned to the third page. It was a series of document access logs from the firm's case management system. The original document directed a $300,000 bequest to a children's literacy foundation. The altered version redirected that bequest to a private holding company. She turned to the fourth page. "The holding company," she said, "shares a registered address with Pacific Meridian Consulting." I sat very still. Altering a client's estate document without authorization was not simply a violation of California professional conduct rules. It was fraud. It was a felony. It was the kind of act that ended careers, destroyed reputations, and resulted in federal prosecution when the dollar amounts crossed into the territory Chloe had just described. "Does anyone else know about this?" I asked. "No one," she said. I recovered the original document version from the server backup archive before I pulled the access logs. I have not discussed any of this with anyone in the building. Good, I said. Lock everything. Encrypt the backup copies and transfer them to the external server Stephen controls. Do not access Nicole's workstation again, and do not let her know anything has been flagged. Chloe nodded and began gathering the pages back into the folder. Chloe, I said. She looked up. You did exactly the right thing, I said. She held my gaze for a moment with the steady, serious expression of someone who had been waiting a long time to be useful in exactly the way she was designed to be useful. I know Mr. Whitmore, she said. That is why I took the job. I was replanting Eleanor when Daniel's car pulled into the driveway. The root system had been damaged too deeply to save the original plant. I had accepted that 3 days ago, kneeling in the dirt with a soil testing kit, and the particular clarity that comes when you stop hoping for a different result and start dealing with the one in front of you. I had ordered a replacement cutting from the same heritage nursery in Napa Valley, where Clara had purchased the original 30 years ago. It arrived that morning wrapped in damp burlap, and I was working it carefully into the prepared soil when I heard the car door slam. Not close. The way Daniel used to slam it when he was a teenager arriving home after an argument. Hard enough to communicate something without having to say it out loud. I did not look up from the planting. He came around the side of the house rather than through the front door, which told me he did not want to be inside for this conversation. People who intend to be kind come through the front door. People who intend to deliver something uncomfortable find open air more comfortable, fewer walls to trap the sound of what they are saying. Dad, he said. Hand me that trowel, I said, nodding toward the tool resting on the garden bench beside him. He picked it up and held it out. I took it without looking at him and worked the soil gently around the base of the new cutting. We need to talk about the house, Daniel said. All right, I said. He cleared his throat. I could hear Nicole in every careful syllable of what he said next, the way you can hear a ventriloquist's technique once you know what to listen for. Nicole and I have been thinking, he said, that it might make more sense for you to have your own space, something smaller, more manageable. There are some really excellent 55-plus communities in Pasadena and in Glendale. Some of them have gardens. Nice ones. Maintained professionally, so you would not have to do all this yourself. I pressed the soil firm around the cutting's roots. This is my home, Daniel, I said. I know that, Dad. Of course I know that. He exhaled hard and pushed both hands into his jacket pockets. But Nicole is going to be making partners soon. She is going to have clients here, important people, and the house is... the neighborhood is great, but the house itself needs work, and it would just be easier if... Easier for whom? I asked. The question landed between us and sat there. Daniel's jaw tightened. He pulled something from his jacket pocket. A small envelope. He set it on the garden bench with the careful deliberateness of a man who had rehearsed this gesture many times and was committed to seeing it through regardless of how it felt. Nicole had a locksmith come yesterday, he said. The locks have been changed on the front and back doors. There is a new key in the envelope. You can come and go as you need to, obviously, but we thought it would be better if Nicole had a key to give to her clients when they use the house for meetings and... She had the locks changed on my house, I said. Not a question, a clarification. I wanted the words to exist clearly in the air between us. Daniel's face flushed red from the collar upward. Not with anger, with shame. The specific, unmistakable flush of a man who knows exactly what he is participating in and cannot make himself stop. Dad, it is just a practical... Daniel. I set the trowel down and looked at my son directly for the first time since he had arrived. This is the house where your mother brought you home from Cedars Sinai. You weighed 6 pounds and 4 ounces, and you screamed for the first 45 minutes, and your mother laughed the entire time because she said it meant your lungs were perfect. This is the house where she taught you to ride a bicycle in the driveway, where she sat with you every night of 3rd grade until you could read an entire chapter without stopping, where she died in the back bedroom holding your hand and mine. Daniel's throat worked hard. His eyes went bright and wet, and he looked away toward the damaged roses along the south fence. Nicole says you have too much attachment to the past, he said quietly. She says it is not healthy. The words hit me the way bad verdicts always had. Not with shock. With a deep, settling sadness that moved through the chest slowly and left something cold behind it. Your wife, I said carefully, had the locks changed on the home your mother and I built together. She removed an antique music box from the display cabinet in the living room without asking. And she told you that my attachment to your mother's memory is the problem worth discussing. Daniel said nothing, but his hands came out of his pockets, and he pressed one against his mouth the way he used to as a small boy, when he was trying very hard not to cry and was losing the effort. "Taught to take the envelope, Dad," he whispered. "Please, just take it. It will be easier if you just take it." I looked at my son for a long moment. The boy who had learned to read in this house. The boy whose mother had loved without reservation or condition until her very last breath. I reached out and picked up the envelope from the bench. "All right, Daniel," I said quietly. "I have it." He nodded quickly, not meeting my eyes, and walked back around the side of the house to his car. The door closed behind him with the same hard slam as before, except this time I understood that the force of it was not anger directed outward. It was a man punishing himself for something he could not make himself undo. I held the envelope in my dirt-covered hand and looked down at the newly planted Eleanor cutting in the soil in front of me. Then I opened the envelope, looked at the new key inside, and set it on the bench. I reached into my flannel shirt pocket and pulled out the original key. The one I had carried for 30 years. I held both of them in my palm and looked at them for a long moment. Then I put the original key back in my pocket, stood up, and went inside through the back garden door. The lock, as it turned out, had not been changed on that one. The invitation arrived through Daniel, which was how Nicole always delivered things. She wanted to appear spontaneous. Daniel called on a Wednesday evening, his voice carrying that particular careful brightness of a man reading from a script he had not written. Nicole wanted to have everyone over for dinner on Friday. A proper sit-down meal, he said. She had been cooking all afternoon, apparently. She wanted to start fresh. I said I would be there at 7. I had been waiting for this dinner since the morning I watched the footage of Nicole moving along the south fence with her spray bottle. People who believed they were winning always eventually wanted an audience. Nicole had achieved what she wanted from the conversation with Daniel about the house. She needed to confirm face-to-face that the victory had landed, that the old man had accepted his diminished position and was prepared to behave accordingly. I was happy to give her that confirmation. Ryan Calloway opened the door when I arrived. I recognized him immediately from his personnel file, which Chloe had included in the blue folder 3 days earlier. 41 years old, senior associate on track for partner review next quarter. Undergraduate degree from UCLA, law degree from USC. Handsome in the careful, maintained way of a man who considered his appearance a professional asset. He was wearing a collared shirt, with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, and holding a glass of red wine with the relaxed confidence of a man who felt entirely at home in someone else's house. He looked at me with the pleasant, slightly condescending smile that attractive, successful people deploy toward elderly strangers they do not consider relevant. "You must be Arthur," he said warmly, extending his hand. "Daniel talks about you all the time. Come on in." "Thank you, Ryan," I said. Something moved briefly across his face when I used his first name. Not alarm, a small recalibration. He had not expected me to know who he was. The dining room table had been set beautifully. Fresh flowers in the center. The good china that had belonged to Daniel's grandmother. Candles. Nicole emerged from the kitchen wearing an apron over her dress, carrying a ceramic dish with both hands. Her face arranged in an expression of warm domestic effort that belonged in a magazine advertisement for the kind of life people performed rather than lived. Arthur. She leaned forward and kissed my cheek. Her perfume was expensive and applied with precision. I am so glad you came. Sit anywhere you like. She set the dish on the table and turned back to the kitchen. Daniel came in from the living room and squeezed my shoulder the way he had been doing lately, quickly, apologetically. Like a man who owed a debt he did not know how to repay. We sat. Nicole brought out 2 more dishes. Ryan refilled everyone's wine. I placed my hand over my glass when he reached me. Just water for me tonight, I said. My doctor has me watching the tannins. Nicole appeared from the kitchen doorway, carrying a small ceramic teapot. I made chamomile, she said, setting it in front of me with a smile of particular warmth. I remembered you mentioned it was your favorite. I had never mentioned any such thing to Nicole Hargrove in my life. I looked at the teapot. Then I looked at Nicole. She held my gaze with the steady, open expression of a woman performing sincerity at a very high level of technical proficiency. That is very thoughtful, I said. Thank you. She poured the tea herself, setting the cup directly in front of my plate with a small, satisfied smile. I watched her hands. Steady, unhurried. The hands of someone who was not nervous about what they had just done. The conversation moved through the early courses with the surface ease of people who had agreed in advance not to discuss anything real. Ryan talked about a commercial litigation case he was managing. Daniel asked about a property development project in Century City. Nicole laughed at the right moments and refilled water glasses and asked Ryan a question about the case that demonstrated she had been briefed on it in advance. I waited. Halfway through the main course, Nicole excused herself to check on dessert in the kitchen. The moment she cleared the doorway, I reached across the table, lifted Ryan's wine glass, and set my full teacup in its place. I set Ryan's wine glass in front of my own plate. It took approximately 4 seconds. Ryan was turned toward Daniel mid-sentence about the Century City project. Daniel was looking at Ryan. Neither of them registered the movement. Nicole returned with a small ceramic ramekin and placed it beside the dessert forks. She looked at the table with the brief, comprehensive scan of a woman checking that everything was in its correct position. Her gaze moved across the place settings without pausing. 40 minutes later, Ryan set down his fork and pressed 2 fingers against his temple. I think I need some air, he said. His voice had gone slightly tight. I am not sure the shellfish agreed with me. Nicole looked at him across the table with an expression of concern so rapid and complete that it confirmed beyond any remaining doubt that she had been expecting something to happen and had simply not been certain about the timing. Oh, Ryan, she said, you should have said, go lie down in the guest room, I will bring you water. Ryan pushed back his chair and stood carefully, his hand gripping the table edge for a moment, before he straightened. He excused himself with the strained dignity of a man who was struggling to maintain composure, while his body was communicating urgent disagreement with his plans for the evening. Daniel watched him go with genuine concern etched across his face. Should we call someone? Daniel asked. He will be fine, Nicole said immediately. He has a sensitivity. It happens sometimes. She looked across the table at me then. Not quickly, deliberately. The way a person looks at someone when they are trying to determine how much that person knows. I picked up my wine glass and took a slow sip. "Delicious dinner, Nicole," I said pleasantly. "You really outdid yourself tonight." Her eyes stayed on my face for 2 full seconds longer than the situation required. For the first time since I had known her, Nicole Hargrove looked at me the way you look at something you cannot immediately categorize. Something that does not fit cleanly into the box you built for it. I smiled at her and reached for the breadbasket. Stephen Hartley kept an office on the 14th floor that most of the firm did not know existed. It was not listed on the building directory. It did not appear on the internal floor plan distributed to new employees during orientation. The door was marked with a small brass plate that said storage, and had said storage for the past 22 years, ever since Stephen and I had agreed that certain conversations required a room that did not exist on any official record. I had not been inside it in 4 years. It smelled the same as it always had. Old paper and strong coffee and the particular dry coolness of a room where the air conditioning had been running without interruption since the Clinton administration. Stephen was already seated when I arrived, his jacket off and his sleeves rolled to the elbows, which meant he had been here for several hours before me. A legal pad covered in his cramped, precise handwriting sat in the center of the table. Beside it, 3 separate stacks of documents, each held together with a binder clip and labeled in Chloe's cleaner hand. Chloe sat to his right. Her laptop open, her expression carrying the focused calm of someone who had slept adequately and eaten breakfast and was prepared to work for as long as the work required. I sat down, poured coffee from the carafe on the credenza, and looked at the 3 stacks. "Walk me through it," I said. Stephen picked up the first stack. "Financial," he said. $63,400 removed from the charitable foundation over 4 months. We have confirmed the receiving account. Pacific Meridian Consulting was incorporated in Nevada 14 months ago. The registered agent processed 412 similar formations in the same calendar year, which is consistent with a shell company service. The listed manager, Thomas Greer, has no professional credentials and no verifiable business history. His only confirmed connection to anyone relevant is a shared grandmother with Nicole Hargrove, documented in a 2019 family court filing from Riverside County. "So the family connection is on record," I said. "Publicly accessible," Stephen confirmed. "A motivated investigator would find it in under an hour." He set the first stack down and picked up the second. "The Kellerman matter," he said. "Margaret Kellerman is 81 years old. She is a retired schoolteacher from Burbank who inherited significant real estate assets from her late husband and came to this firm 6 years ago to put her estate in order. The codicil amendment she authorized directed $300,000 to a children's literacy organization in the San Fernando Valley. She signed the original document in the presence of 2 witnesses and a notary on the 14th of last month. "Chitty, and the altered version?" I asked. Chloe turned her laptop toward me. Side by side on the screen were 2 versions of the same document. The differences were not visible to the eye at the paragraph level. They required the kind of close reading that a busy attorney processing a high volume of files might reasonably skip. The digital metadata shows the document was accessed and modified from Nicole's workstation credentials at 11:14 in the evening 3 weeks ago, Chloe said. The modification changed the beneficiary designation and the routing information for the distribution. The altered version was uploaded to the client file the following morning and would have been executed at the time of Mrs. Kellerman's passing without anyone detecting the change. "Unless someone ran a version comparison," I said. "Which is not standard procedure," Chloe said. "It would only happen if someone had a specific reason to look." I thought about Margaret Kellerman, 81 years old, a retired school teacher who had spent 6 years trusting this firm to honor her wishes. who had signed her name to a document she believed would send $300,000 to children learning to read in the San Fernando Valley. "Is the original version recoverable?" I asked. "Already recovered and preserved," Chloe said. "Stored on the external server with full chain of custody documentation. The metadata is intact and will withstand forensic examination." Stephen picked up the third stack. "The charitable foundation withdrawals constitute wire fraud under federal statute," he said, "because the transfers moved through a federally insured banking institution. That gives the FBI concurrent jurisdiction alongside the California state authorities. The Kellerman document alteration is felony fraud under California Penal Code, Section 470, with potential elder abuse enhancements, given Mrs. Kellerman's age, which would elevate the sentencing exposure considerably." I looked at the 3 stacks of documents on the table. $63,000 stolen from Clara's foundation. A dying woman's final wishes rewritten in the middle of the night. A music box missing from a display shelf. 7 roses poisoned along a garden fence. "Arthur," Stephen said. He set his reading glasses on the table and looked at me directly, which was something he only did when he had something to say that he had been holding back. "I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly." "When have I ever done otherwise?" I said. "How are you holding up?" The question sat between us in the quiet of the room that did not officially exist. Outside the narrow window, the afternoon light was moving across the Los Angeles basin in long gold sheets, the kind of light that made the city look briefly like somewhere worth all the trouble it caused. I thought about Eleanor replanted in fresh soil along the south fence. I thought about the music box that played 8 bars of Chopin every Sunday morning for 31 years. I thought about Daniel's face when he set that envelope on the garden bench. The way he had pressed his hand against his mouth to keep himself from coming apart. "I am holding up fine," I said. "What I am not holding is any remaining patience for letting this continue." Stephen nodded slowly. The predatory gleam I had seen in his eyes exactly twice before in 30 years of friendship settled into place behind his glasses. "The year-end gala is in 9 days," he said. "I know," I said. "Nicole is expecting to be announced as managing partner that evening." "I know that too," I said. I picked up my coffee cup and looked at the 3 stacks of documents. Every transaction, every timestamp, every digital fingerprint leading back to the same 2 people. "Call the FBI field office in Los Angeles," I said. "Ask for the Financial Crimes Division. Tell them we have a wire fraud case with full documentation and we need a coordinated action plan for a specific date and venue." Stephen reached for his phone. "And Stephen," I said. He looked up. "Tell them to bring enough agents for 3 arrests, not 2. Stephen's hand paused over the phone. "3, he said. I set my coffee cup down and looked at him steadily. "Thomas Greer signed the Pacific Meridian Incorporation documents," I said. "His grandmother's name is on a court filing in Riverside County. He knew exactly what he was helping to build." Stephen picked up the phone. 9 days, he said quietly. 9 days. I agreed. Nicole's parents arrived at 7:15 in a rented Lincoln Town car that they had clearly chosen for the statement it made, rather than the comfort it provided. Her father, Gerald Hargrove, was 63 years old and moved through the world with the loud, space-consuming confidence of a man who had spent his entire adult life mistaking volume for authority. He wore a sport coat over a collared shirt and shook my hand at the front door with the particular aggressive firmness of someone who wanted the first physical interaction to establish a hierarchy. He smelled of bourbon and a cologne that had been applied in a quantity that suggested either poor judgment or deliberate aggression. Her mother, Diane Hargrove, followed 2 steps behind him, the way she had probably followed him for 40 years. She looked at my living room with the quick, comprehensive assessment of a woman who had been cataloging other people's inadequacies her entire life, and whose face communicated the results of that catalog within approximately 3 seconds of entering a room. "Charming," she said in a tone that meant the opposite. Nicole had arranged the living room with the careful deliberateness she brought to everything that mattered to her image. Fresh flowers on the side table, the good throw blanket folded precisely over the arm of the sofa, a cheese board on the coffee table that had been assembled by someone who understood the difference between presentation and sustenance, and had chosen presentation without hesitation. Daniel sat beside me on the sofa. He had been quieter than usual all evening, his shoulders carrying a tension that I recognized as the physical weight of a man who knew something uncomfortable was coming, and had decided his role was to endure it rather than prevent it. Gerald lowered himself into the armchair across from me and looked at the room with the slow, proprietary scan of a man evaluating real estate he was considering purchasing at a significant discount. "Daniel tells me you built this place yourself," he said. "Clara and I designed it together," I said. "A contractor built it. I did the garden." Gerald nodded in the way people nod when they are not listening, but want credit for appearing to. Diane picked up one of Clara's ceramic figures from the display shelf near the window, turned it over to examine the base, and set it back down 2 inches from where it had been. She did not acknowledge that she had touched it. We ate at the dining room table. Nicole had ordered from the same Brentwood restaurant as before, though this time she had not bothered with the pretense of serving dishes. The containers sat on a folding table near the kitchen door, and she plated everything in the kitchen before bringing it out, which accomplished the same effect with considerably less effort. I noticed the efficiency and appreciated it for what it was. The performance was for Gerald and Diane, not for me. She was no longer performing for me. That told me the evening had a different purpose than the last one. The conversation through dinner moved in the direction Nicole had built for it, the way a river moves in the direction of the channel that has been dug to receive it. Gerald talked about property values in their neighborhood in Scottsdale. Diane asked Daniel pointed questions about his billing rate and his trajectory toward partnership that were designed to remind everyone at the table, including Daniel, that Nicole's career was outpacing his. Nicole deflected these observations with the practiced grace of a woman who had been managing her parents' social aggression for decades, while simultaneously deploying it as a weapon. I ate my dinner and said very little. After the plates were cleared, Nicole brought out a bottle of cognac and 4 glasses. She did not bring a glass for me. That was when I knew we were approaching it. Gerald poured for himself and without offering to pour for Daniel. He set the bottle down in the center of the table and looked at me with the direct, unapologetic stare of a man who had decided that the pleasantries portion of the evening was finished. "Arthur," he said, "let us be straightforward with each other." "I would appreciate that," I said. Nicole reached into the leather portfolio she had set beside her chair at the beginning of the evening. She removed a white envelope thick with the particular stiffness of a cashier's check and placed it on the table in front of her. Then she slid it across the tablecloth toward my plate with a single smooth motion. It stopped directly in front of me. $20,000, Nicole said. Her voice was steady and professional, the voice she used in depositions when she wanted to convey that the terms being offered were both final and reasonable. "There is a document as well, a straightforward agreement. You would acknowledge that independent living arrangements better suit your current needs and that the family home would transfer into a trust managed jointly by Daniel and myself. You would relocate within 60 days to a facility of your choosing. We are prepared to cover the first year of costs above the check amount. Gerald leaned back in his chair with the satisfaction of a man watching a business transaction proceed according to plan. Diane looked at the ceramic figures on the shelf near the window. Daniel stared at the tablecloth directly in front of him and did not move. I looked at the envelope. Then I picked it up and turned it over. I read the words twice. Not because I needed to read them twice, because I wanted the full weight of what Nicole Hargrove had just done to settle completely into my understanding before I responded. She had written a check from Clara's foundation. The foundation Clara had built over 6 years to fund legal aid clinics for people who could not afford an attorney. She had taken that money, the money Clara had believed would protect the most vulnerable people in Southern California, and she had used it to try to buy me out of my own home. I set the envelope down on the table. I folded my hands in front of me. I looked at Nicole with the same expression I had used for 40 years, when a witness had just handed me exactly what I needed. "Thank you, Nicole," I said quietly. I picked up the envelope and placed it in the inner pocket of my jacket. Gerald smiled and reached for his cognac. Nicole let out a slow breath that she disguised as a sip of water. Daniel continued staring at the tablecloth. His right hand resting beside his plate had curled into a fist so tight that the knuckles had gone the color of chalk. I stood up, thanked everyone for a pleasant evening, and walked to the front door. Outside, the California night was cool and completely still. I stood on the front step and looked up at the sky for a moment. Then I reached into my jacket pocket, felt the envelope against my fingertips, and walked to my truck. They thought my silence was gratitude. They thought the old man had finally understood his position and accepted it with appropriate humility. They had just handed me the last piece of evidence I needed. I woke at 5:15 without an alarm, the way I had woken every morning for the past 40 years. The house was completely dark. The California December air came through the gap at the bottom of the bedroom window, cool and carrying the faint eucalyptus smell that drifted down from the hills on still mornings. I lay in bed for exactly 3 minutes, which was my habit, staring at the ceiling and organizing my thoughts before my feet touched the floor. Today, the thoughts organized themselves very quickly. I got up, made coffee, and carried it out to the garden in the dark. The replacement Eleanor cutting stood in the south bed, pale and upright in the pre-dawn shadow, its small leaves catching the faint ambient light from the street. I had been checking it every morning since the replanting. The roots were establishing. In another 3 weeks, it would begin to show new growth at the tips. Some things, given proper conditions, come back stronger than they were before. I finished my coffee, rinsed the cup, and walked down the hallway to the cedar closet at the far end of the bedroom. The garment bag hung at the very back, behind a winter coat I had not worn in 6 years, and a row of the flannel shirts and canvas work pants that constituted my daily uniform. The bag was dark canvas with a brass zipper that had not been opened in a decade. I had to move the other items aside to reach it, which I did carefully, the way you move things aside when you are not yet certain you are ready for what you are about to find. I pulled the zipper down slowly. The suit was midnight blue, a color Clara had chosen. I had told the tailor I wanted something dark and authoritative. Clara had been sitting in the chair beside the fitting platform, her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and she had looked at the fabric swatches for a long moment before picking up the midnight blue sample and holding it next to my face. "This one," she had said. "It makes you look like someone who has already won." The tailor had made 3 suits that year. I had worn this one exactly once on the evening I signed the documents, transferring operational control of Whitmore and Associates to the board, and stepped away from the firm I had built from a rented office the size of a janitor's closet. I had stood in this bedroom afterward and looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. Then I had folded the suit carefully, placed it in the garment bag, and hung it at the back of the cedar closet. I had believed on that evening that I would not need it again. I carried it to the ironing board and set up the steam iron, waiting for the plate to reach temperature while I laid the trousers across the board. The hiss of the steam in the quiet house was the only sound in the room. I worked the iron slowly along the crease of each leg, smoothing the fine Italian wool back into the precise lines the tailor had intended. The fabric responded immediately, returning to its original shape with the willingness of something that had been made correctly and had simply been waiting for the opportunity to prove it. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. "Stephen." I set the iron on its rest and answered. "The field office confirmed an hour ago," he said without greeting, because neither of us had ever wasted time on greetings when there was something that mattered to discuss. 8 agents. Financial Crimes Unit +2 from the Organized Fraud Division given the elder abuse enhancement on the Kellerman matter. They will be in position by 6 this evening, 4 hours before the gala begins. "Entry points?" I asked. "Service corridor on the east side of the hotel, the underground parking structure, and the private security room adjacent to the main ballroom. They have the floor plan. They know where to be, and they know the signal." "Good," I said. "Arthur." He paused in the way he paused when he had something to say that he had already decided to say, regardless of how it was received. "Are you absolutely certain you want to do this the way we have planned it? We could hand the complete file to the FBI today and let them execute without the public component. Nicole and Ryan would be arrested before the gala begins. It would be quieter." I picked up the iron and returned to the trousers. "Nicole changed the locks on my home," I said. "She poisoned the roses Clara planted 30 years ago. She altered a dying woman's final wishes in the middle of the night. She stole from a foundation that exists because Clara believed that every person in this city deserves access to justice, regardless of what they have in their bank account." I smoothed the iron along the second leg with slow, deliberate strokes. "And she wrote a check from that foundation to pay for my removal from my own life." Stephen said nothing. "Quiet is a mercy," I said. "I am not feeling particularly merciful." "No," Stephen said. "I did not think you were." We ended the call. I finished the trousers and moved to the jacket, working the iron carefully across the shoulders and down the sleeves, paying particular attention to the lapels, which had taken on a slight curve from a decade of hanging. The steam worked them flat again, gradually requiring patience and consistent pressure rather than force. Most things did. I hung the finished suit on the wooden valet stand beside the window and stepped back to look at it. Clara had been right, as she almost always was. The midnight blue was the correct choice. It was the color of authority without aggression, confidence without display, the color of a man who did not need to announce himself because the room would do that for him. I polished my black Oxford shoes until the leather reflected the bedroom ceiling light in a clean, unwavering oval. I set them beneath the valet stand. I laid out a white dress shirt, a silver tie, and the gold pocket watch Clara had given me on our 20th anniversary, the one I carried on days when I needed to remember exactly what I was doing all of this for. I looked at the suit for a long moment. Then I walked to the kitchen, made a second cup of coffee, and took it out to the garden. I sat on the bench beside the Eleanor cutting and drank it slowly in the morning light, listening to the neighborhood come alive around me. A dog barking 2 streets over. A sprinkler system activating on the corner lot. The low, distant sound of the freeway beginning to fill with the day's first commuters. An ordinary December morning in an ordinary California neighborhood. Tonight would not be ordinary. I finished my coffee, set the cup on the bench beside me, and looked at the small, pale cutting in the fresh, dark soil. "Almost time," I said quietly. I was not sure if I was speaking to Eleanor or to Clara, or simply to the version of myself that had spent 10 years believing the battles were finished. It did not matter. All three of us already knew the answer. The Meridian Grand Hotel in Century City had been hosting corporate events for 30 years, and it showed the particular confidence of a building that understood its own purpose completely. The main ballroom occupied the entire east wing of the fourth floor, a vast rectangular space with 20-foot ceilings, a herringbone parquet floor that had been polished to a depth that made it look less like wood and more like dark water, and a chandelier system that the hotel's event coordinator had described to Stephen when we booked the room 6 weeks ago as the finest in Los Angeles County. I had taken her word for it. Clara would have had an opinion. She always had opinions about chandeliers. I arrived at 8:40 and stood for a moment in the carpeted corridor outside the main ballroom doors, listening to the sound of 200 people engaged in the particular performance of professional celebration. The string quartet was playing something I recognized, but could not immediately name the notes carrying through the closed doors, with the muffled elegance of music heard from the correct distance. I was wearing the midnight blue suit, the white dress shirt, the silver tie. Clara's pocket watch in my left breast pocket, its familiar weight resting against my ribs the way it always had on the days when I needed the reminder of what mattered and what did not. The corridor was empty except for 2 hotel staff members moving a service cart toward the kitchen entrance at the far end. Neither of them looked at me. I had arrived through the lobby rather than the service entrance, walking past the valet stand and through the main doors with the deliberate, unhurried pace of a man who belonged in every room he had ever entered. The doorman had nodded. The front desk clerk had smiled. No one had questioned my presence because I had not given them any reason to. People questioned what looked uncertain. I had not looked uncertain since 1987. I pushed open one of the ballroom doors just enough to see inside without entering, and stood in the gap for a moment, taking inventory the way I always had before walking into a courtroom. Know the room before the room knows you are in it. Understand the geography. Identify where the power is concentrated and where it is absent. The power in this room was concentrated in the northeast corner. Nicole stood at the center of a group of 8 people holding a champagne flute, with the easy authority of a woman who had been rehearsing this moment for years. She was wearing a deep green dress that had clearly been chosen to be remembered. Her dark hair pulled back in a style that communicated effortless sophistication to anyone who did not know how much effortless sophistication required. She was laughing at something the man to her left had said, her head tilting back at the precise angle that conveyed genuine delight without disturbing her composure. She was magnificent at this. I could acknowledge that without it changing anything. Ryan Calloway stood 2 feet to her right, occupying the position that Daniel should have occupied. He held his champagne glass at the same height as Nicole's, an unconscious mirroring that people in close personal relationships developed without realizing it. He was speaking to a white-haired man I recognized as the chairman of the firm's client advisory board, leaning in slightly to make his point, his body language projecting the practiced confidence of a man who believed the next chapter of his career was already written and entirely favorable. Daniel stood 6 feet away from his wife, not beside her, not in her orbit. 6 feet away at the edge of the separate conversation involving 2 junior associates who were clearly uncomfortable with his presence, but too polite to disengage. He was holding his champagne glass by the stem rather than the bowl, which was technically correct, and also the behavior of a man paying close attention to something that had nothing to do with the conversation he was nominally part of. His eyes kept moving to Nicole, not with jealousy, not with suspicion, with the particular watchful attention of a man who had begun recently and against his will to notice things he had previously chosen not to see. I had been watching Daniel for weeks. Something had been shifting in him since the evening at the dining room table when Nicole had slid the envelope across the cloth and he had sat with his fist clenched white against his plate. He had not said anything to me. He was not ready for that yet. But the shift was there, visible to anyone who knew what they were looking for. He was waking up. Slowly and painfully, the way people wake up from the particular sleep that denial provides, but he was waking up. I let the ballroom door close softly and stepped back into the corridor. My phone showed 8:52. Stephen had texted at 8:45. All positions confirmed. I typed back 2 words and put the phone in my jacket pocket. From the northeast corner of the ballroom, I heard Nicole's laugh carry through the closed door, again bright and perfectly calibrated. The laugh of a woman standing at the absolute peak of everything she had built, and finding it exactly as satisfying as she had always believed it would be. I understood that feeling. I had stood at the peak of this firm myself once in a different decade, in a different suit, with Clara beside me, and the future arranged in front of us like a landscape seen from sufficient altitude that all the difficult terrain was invisible. The difference between that evening and this one was simple. I had built what I was standing on. Nicole was standing on what she had taken. And in 8 minutes, when Stephen stepped to the microphone to open the formal program, that difference was going to become apparent to every person in that room. I straightened my tie, checked the pocket watch one final time, and placed my hand flat against the ballroom door. The parquet floor beyond it was dark and gleaming like water before a storm. I pushed the door open and walked inside. The room did not stop all at once. It stopped in layers, the way sound dies in a large space when something interrupts the frequency that was holding everything together. The people nearest the door registered my entrance first. A junior associate whose name I did not know looked up from his champagne glass and frowned slightly, the way people frown when they see something that does not immediately parse. The woman beside him followed his gaze, then the couple to their left, then the group beyond them. The ripple moved outward from the door toward the center of the room at the pace of human attention, which is faster than most people realize when the thing demanding that attention is sufficiently unusual. I walked at my normal pace, long strides, shoulders back, eyes level, and directed toward the far end of the room where the low stage platform held the podium and the presentation screens. I did not look left or right. I did not acknowledge the turning heads or the conversations that were cutting off in mid-sentence around me. I had walked into enough difficult rooms in my life to know that the worst thing you could do was betray any awareness of the effect you were having. Let the room react. Your job was simply to keep moving. The older partners recognized me first. I saw it happen in the face of Richard Callahan, who had joined the firm as a second-year associate 26 years ago and was now the head of our corporate transactions practice. He was standing 12 feet to my left, holding a glass of sparkling water mid-conversation with a woman I recognized as a federal magistrate judge from the Central District. His face went through 4 distinct expressions in approximately 2 seconds. Confusion, recognition, disbelief, and then something that was not quite fear but was closely related to it, the expression of a man who has just understood that the ground beneath a situation he thought he understood has shifted in a way he has not yet fully calculated. He said something to the magistrate judge. She turned and looked at me. Her expression went through a similar sequence, though more compressed, the way experienced legal minds process unexpected information faster than most. I kept walking. Nicole's laugh reached me from the northeast corner, bright and carrying, cut short in the middle as the person she was speaking to stopped responding and looked past her shoulder toward the entrance. I watched her register the shift in the room before she turned. She spent 2 full seconds reading the faces around her, the way a skilled attorney reads a jury before looking at the evidence they are reacting to. Then she turned and looked at me. I was 30 feet away from her, close enough to see the precise moment her composure encountered something it had not been built to handle. Her champagne flute stopped moving halfway to her lips. Her eyes traveled from my face to the midnight blue suit, to the silver tie, and back to my face. And in that sequence of observations, something in her expression performed the rapid, ugly work of complete reassessment. She had categorized me 9 months ago. Old man, irrelevant, garden, flannel shirt. She had filed me under dismissed and moved on to more important considerations. The category was not holding. Ryan saw me a half-second after Nicole did. I watched the blood leave his face with the speed and completeness of a man whose body understood the situation faster than his mind was prepared to. His champagne glass tilted slightly in his hand, a few drops of liquid moving toward the rim before he corrected the angle with a sharp, involuntary grip. He said something low and urgent to Nicole. She did not respond. She was still looking at me. Stephen materialized at my left shoulder from the direction of the east corridor, moving with the silent, purposeful economy of a man who had been waiting for this exact moment and had positioned himself to arrive at it without drama. He fell into step beside me without a word. We had walked into rooms together for 30 years. We did not need to discuss it. The effect of Stephen's appearance beside me was immediate and specific. The senior partners who had been uncertain about what they were seeing became certain. Stephen Hartley did not stand beside people casually. He stood beside the person whose interests he was there to represent. Every attorney in that room understood what his presence at my shoulder meant, even if they did not yet understand the full dimensions of why it meant it. The security chief, a broad man named Gerald Patterson, who had been with the firm for 11 years, and whom I had personally interviewed before approving his hire, was moving toward me from the south wall. He had been sent, I assumed, by someone who had managed to communicate a request to him in the last 60 seconds. He was moving with professional purpose, his expression set in the careful neutral of a man executing a duty he had not yet fully thought through. He reached us. He looked at me. He looked at Stephen. Stephen said 2 words to him very quietly. Gerald Patterson stopped walking. He stood completely still for a moment, his expression working through something, and then he straightened his shoulders, clasped his hands in front of him, and stepped aside with a deliberateness that communicated to every person watching. And by this point, most of the room was watching that he had not stepped aside because he had been physically stopped. He had stepped aside because it was the correct thing to do. I looked at Nicole across the remaining distance between us. Her champagne glass was at her side, now hanging from fingers that were not quite steady. Ryan had taken half a step backward, which placed him fractionally behind her right shoulder, a positioning that was either unconscious self-preservation or a deliberate calculation about which of them was better placed to attempt a recovery. Daniel had turned from his separate conversation and was looking at me with an expression I had not seen on his face in years. It was the expression he used to wear as a boy when something had frightened him, and he had not yet decided whether to pretend it had not. I walked past Nicole without stopping, past Ryan, past the northeast corner, and the client advisory board chairman, and the federal magistrate judge, and the junior associates with their champagne glasses arrested halfway to their mouths. I walked to the stage and put my foot on the first step. Mr. Whitmore. The voice was Nicole's. She had followed me. 8 feet behind me, her heels striking the parquet with the sharp, rapid rhythm of a woman who had made a decision and was committed to it regardless of where it led. I paused on the first step and turned to look at her. Her face was performing composure at maximum effort. The green dress, the perfect hair, the champagne still in her hand, because putting it down would have required a decision about where to put it. and there was no good answer to that question in the current geometry of the room. This event, she said, her voice low and controlled, and carrying only to me, is a private firm function. You have not been a part of this firm for 10 years. I looked at her for a moment. Nicole, I said pleasantly, I have been a part of this firm since before you passed your bar exam. I turned back to the stage and climbed the remaining 2 steps. The stage was smaller than I remembered. Or perhaps I had simply spent enough years away from elevated platforms that the dimensions no longer felt familiar. The podium was a clean acrylic column with a built-in microphone, the kind that required no adjustment for height because it was designed to project sound in any direction with equal clarity. Whoever had specified it understood that the person standing behind it should not have to fight the equipment to be heard. Stephen was already at the microphone. He had moved to the stage from a different angle than mine, arriving at the podium with the unhurried precision of a man executing a plan that had been rehearsed in his mind for 9 days. He tapped the microphone once with his index finger. The amplified sound cut through the remaining ambient noise of the room the way a gavel cuts through the noise of a courtroom that has not yet understood it is being called to order. The string quartet stopped playing. The last note from the cello hung in the air for a moment, and then dissolved, leaving a silence so complete that I could hear the ventilation system running somewhere above the ceiling panels. 200 people looked at the stage. Stephen's voice, when he spoke, carried the particular resonant authority of a man who had spent 4 decades making rooms listen to him. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, on behalf of Whitmore and Associates, I want to thank you for joining us this evening. Before we proceed to the formal program, there is a matter of governance that requires our attention. As the managing trustee of the Whitmore Family Trust, which holds the controlling interest in this firm, I am invoking the founder's right of direct address, as specified in the original partnership charter. A murmur moved through the room. Not loud. The kind of murmur that happens when people who understand legal language hear legal language being used and begin to calculate what it means for them personally. Nicole had followed me to the foot of the stage. She stood on the floor below the platform, her green dress bright under the chandelier light. Her eyes moving rapidly between Stephen and me with the expression of a chess player watching the board rearrange itself in a configuration she had not anticipated and could not immediately counter. The founder of this firm, Stephen continued, has not addressed this organization in 10 years. He is addressing it tonight because certain matters have come to his attention that require his direct involvement. Please welcome Arthur Whitmore. The room responded the way rooms respond when they are uncertain whether they are witnessing something wonderful or something terrible, and have not yet received enough information to decide. A scattering of applause from the people who recognized my name and responded to it instinctively. Silence from the larger group who were still processing. And from the northeast corner where Ryan Calloway had retreated after Nicole moved toward the stage, nothing at all. I stepped to the microphone. Thank you, Stephen, I said. I looked out at 200 faces arranged in the particular attentive stillness of people who have understood that something important is happening and that their job right now is to receive it. I will be brief. I reached into my jacket's inner pocket and removed the white envelope. I held it up so the room could see it, then placed it flat on the top of the podium. This envelope was given to me last night, I said. It contains a cashier's check for $20,000 drawn on the Whitmore Family Charitable Foundation operating account. It was presented to me as an inducement to vacate my home and remove myself from the life of my son. I want the board members in this room to understand what that means. Someone with signatory authority over a charitable foundation used that foundation's assets for a personal transaction. Under California law, that is a breach of fiduciary duty. Under federal statute, because the transaction moved through a federally insured institution, it is wire fraud. The murmur that moved through the room this time was different, louder, the sound of people recalibrating. I nodded to the audiovisual booth at the rear of the room. The presentation screens behind me, which had been displaying the firm's logo in elegant silver against a dark background, went black. Then they lit up. The first image was a spreadsheet. 11 rows, 4 columns. Dates, amounts, account numbers, and the name Pacific Meridian Consulting repeated 11 times in the rightmost column. Clean, precise, and completely legible from every point in the room. $63,400. I said, removed from the charitable foundation over 4 months and transferred to a shell company incorporated in Nevada with no legitimate business operations. The second image replaced the first. It was a side-by-side document comparison, the two versions of Margaret Kellerman's estate codicil, displayed in parallel columns with the differences highlighted in red. A client of this firm, I said, 81 years old, signed a document directing $300,000 to a children's literacy organization in the San Fernando Valley. That document was accessed from a firm workstation at 11:14 in the evening 3 weeks ago and modified without the client's knowledge or consent to redirect the bequest to an account connected to the same shell company you see in the previous exhibit. The third image appeared. It was the security footage timestamp display from the firm's case management system, showing the workstation credentials, the access time, and the document version history in a format that required no interpretation. The room had gone completely still, not the polite stillness of an audience giving a speaker their attention. The tight, airless stillness of 200 people holding their breath because they had understood what they were looking at and were waiting for the part they had not yet seen. Nicole moved. She came up the stage steps fast, her heels striking the wood with a sharp, urgent rhythm, her hand reaching toward the podium with an intention that was not yet fully formed, but was driven by the pure instinct to stop what was happening by physically intervening in it. I did not step back. I did not reach for the microphone or the envelope or any of the materials on the podium. I simply turned and looked at her. She stopped, 3 feet from me on the stage of the firm, whose name she had used as a credential for 3 years, whose clients she had exploited, and whose foundation she had treated as a personal account. Nicole Hargrove stopped moving and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. It was not anger. It was not calculation. It was the expression that arrives when every prepared response has been rendered useless simultaneously, and the person wearing it has nothing left to put in its place. "Nicole," I said quietly, so that only she could hear it beneath the silence of the room. "Sit down." Her champagne glass, which she had carried up the steps without apparently noticing she was still holding it, slipped from her fingers. It hit the stage floor and shattered the sharp sound, cutting through the stillness like a single gunshot, and the golden liquid spread across the dark wood in a shape that caught the chandelier light and held it. She stared at the broken glass at her feet. Then she looked up at me. Her lips moved, but whatever she intended to say did not arrive. Behind her, at the foot of the stage, Daniel stood with both hands pressed flat against his thighs, and his face turned upward toward his wife and his father on the stage above him, wearing the expression of a man watching the last wall of a structure he had lived inside for years come down all at once. Nobody moved to clean up the broken glass. It lay scattered across the stage floor between Nicole and the podium, catching the chandelier light in small, sharp fragments, and nobody moved, because the room had arrived at the particular suspended state that occurs when 200 people have simultaneously understood that what they are witnessing has not yet finished, and that any movement on their part might interrupt something that needed to complete itself. Nicole stood 3 feet from me with her hands at her sides and her face performing the hardest work it had ever been asked to perform. She was trying to locate a response. I could see the effort of it. She was an intelligent woman and a skilled attorney, and she was searching through everything she knew about managing difficult situations for something that would apply to this one. There was nothing. This was not a difficult situation. This was a conclusion. Well, I said at normal volume this time, so the microphone carried it clearly to the back of the room. "You should step down from the stage." She looked at me for 2 more seconds. Then she turned and walked to the stage steps, moving with the careful, deliberate precision of a person concentrating hard on not showing the full extent of what they are feeling. She descended the 3 steps to the ballroom floor and stopped at the bottom, standing in the small, clear space that the crowd had unconsciously created around her. I returned to the microphone. "Shinka, I want to address the board members directly," I said. "And I want to address the clients of this firm who are in this room tonight, because what I am about to say concerns the trust you have placed in this organization and the obligation we have to honor it." I looked out at the faces in front of me. Partners who had built careers inside the structure I had created. Junior associates who had joined believing they were entering an institution with genuine integrity. Clients who had handed us their most consequential problems and trusted us to handle them with care. "Ryan Calloway," I said. The name landed in the silence with the weight of a formal citation. Ryan was standing at the edge of the crowd near the east wall where he had retreated after Nicole moved toward the stage. He had been very still for the past several minutes, with the particular stillness of a person who believes that not moving will make them less visible. He was wrong about that. In a room where everyone else was reacting, absolute stillness was its own form of visibility. He looked at me when I said his name. His face had the gray, compressed quality of a man whose body had been processing adrenaline for 20 minutes and had run out of productive uses for it. "Mr. Calloway was granted senior associate status at this firm 18 months ago," I said. "During that period, he has been a joint participant in every financial transaction I have described this evening. The Pacific Meridian Consulting account, which received $63,400 from the charitable foundation, has 2 authorized signatories. One of them is Nicole Hargrove. The other is Ryan Calloway." Another image appeared on the screens behind me. A bank account signature card, the names printed clearly in the standard format of a financial institution document. "The modification to Mrs. Kellerman's estate document," I continued, "was accessed from Nicole Hargrove's workstation credentials. However, the metadata from the firm's server shows that a second set of credentials belonging to Ryan Calloway accessed the same document 40 minutes earlier that evening from a remote login. The version he accessed was the original. The version that existed after Nicole's access was the modified one." I paused for exactly 1 beat. They worked together. Ryan's jaw tightened. His right hand hanging at his side closed into a fist and then opened again in a movement he probably did not know he was making. "I also want to address something personal," I said, "because the events of this past month have not been limited to financial misconduct." I reached into my jacket pocket and removed my phone. I had loaded the relevant footage that morning, a 12-second clip from the garden camera transferred to my phone by Chloe 48 hours ago. I held the phone up toward the presentation camera mounted at the rear of the stage, which Stephen had arranged to be connected to the main screens. The footage appeared on the displays behind me. It showed the South Garden at night, the timestamp reading 11:47, the image clear enough in the ambient light to show a figure moving along the fence line with a spray bottle crouching at the base of each climbing rose in turn. The figure's face was not visible in this clip. It did not need to be. The clothing was visible. The deliberate, methodical movement was visible. The spray bottle was visible. My late wife planted those roses 30 years ago, I said. Every one of them. She chose the varieties from a catalog she kept on her nightstand. She brought the first cutting home from the post office herself, wrapped in damp newspaper, and she talked to it the whole drive home because she said new plants needed to hear a human voice to understand they were somewhere safe. The room was absolutely still. 7 of those plants were deliberately poisoned, I said. The chemical compound used was a systemic herbicide applied directly to the root zone. I have a forensic soil analysis confirming the presence and concentration of the compound, collected by a licensed environmental testing laboratory, and admissible as evidence under California Evidence Code, Section 1520. I placed my phone back in my pocket. And I am not telling you this because I want your sympathy, I said. I am telling you because the people who did what I have described this evening did not limit themselves to stealing money. They poisoned the things that could not be replaced. And I think you should know the full scope of what was done and by whom before the next portion of this evening proceeds. I looked out at the board members in the front row, at the clients along the sides, at the junior associates packed into the rear of the room with their champagne glasses held forgotten at their sides. Then I looked at Daniel. He was standing at the edge of the stage, 10 feet from his wife, not looking at Nicole. He was looking at me with an expression that had moved past shock and past grief into something quieter and more permanent. The expression of a man who has finally, at great cost, seen something clearly. I held his gaze for a moment. Then I reached into my shirt pocket, removed the white envelope with the Whitmore Family Charitable Foundation logo printed in its lower left corner, and placed it on the podium directly in front of the microphone. This is the price they believed would make me disappear, I said. I want it entered into evidence. I stepped back from the microphone and nodded toward the ballroom entrance. The doors opened. 8 federal agents entered the Meridian Grand Ballroom at 9:04 in the evening. I know the exact time because I checked Clara's pocket watch at the moment the doors opened, the way I had always checked the courtroom clock at the moment a verdict was delivered. Time mattered in the law. It mattered in the record. And this was going into the record. The agents moved with the practiced, unhurried efficiency of people who had executed this kind of action many times before and had learned that urgency and speed were not the same thing. They wore dark suits rather than tactical gear, a deliberate choice that Stephen had coordinated with the field office supervisor. This was a financial crimes action in a room full of attorneys, judges, and civic leaders. The optics of the entrance mattered. Professional dress communicated that the federal government was not here to alarm the innocent. It was here to collect the guilty. The crowd parted immediately. Not the gradual, reluctant parting of people unsure whether they should move, but the fast, instinctive clearing that happens when human beings recognize federal authority in motion and make the collective decision that they want to be as clearly not the target as possible. The lead agent was a woman named Supervisor Patricia Walsh, whose name I knew from the briefing documents Stephen had shared with me 4 days ago. She was 46 years old, 17 years in the Financial Crimes Division, and she moved through the cleared ballroom floor with the particular calm of someone who had nothing to prove and everything already prepared. She walked directly to Nicole. Nicole saw her coming. She had been standing at the base of the stage since she descended the steps, and she had been very still in the way that people are, still when they are rapidly calculating and have not yet landed on a calculation that works. When she saw Supervisor Walsh moving toward her with 2 agents flanking her at a distance that communicated purpose without aggression, Nicole's stillness shifted quality. It became the stillness of a person who has run out of calculations. Nicole Hargrove, Supervisor Walsh said. Yes. Nicole's voice came out steady, which was a remarkable achievement, given what I could see happening in the rest of her face. I am Supervisor Patricia Walsh, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Financial Crimes Division. I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of wire fraud, breach of charitable trust, and fraudulent alteration of a legal document with elder abuse enhancements. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back. Nicole looked at Supervisor Walsh for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked up at me on the stage. Her expression in that moment was not what I had expected. It was not anger. It was not the cold, calculating assessment she had aimed at me across dinner tables and garden fences for the past 9 months. It was something much simpler and much worse. It was the expression of a person who had genuinely not believed until this exact second that this outcome was possible. Who had constructed an entire architecture of confidence around the assumption that she was too smart, too careful, and too well-positioned to end up here. She had been wrong about all three. She turned around. She placed her hands behind her back. The handcuffs closed with a sound that was quieter than I had expected. A soft metallic click, rather than the sharp, dramatic snap that courtroom dramas had led generations of Americans to anticipate. Real consequences, in my experience, were almost always quieter than the fictional version. Across the room, the second pair of agents reached Ryan Calloway. Ryan did not wait for the formal address. He had watched Nicole's arrest from his position near the east wall with the expression of a man watching something fall that he had known was going to fall for some time and had spent weeks telling himself would not. When the agents reached him, he was already turning, already placing his wrists behind his back, a cooperation that communicated not remorse but the pragmatic calculation of a man who had decided that resistance would make things worse without making anything better. His handcuffs closed. The third pair of agents had already moved toward the service corridor that led to the hotel's underground parking structure. Thomas Greer, Nicole's cousin, and the registered manager of Pacific Meridian Consulting, had been identified arriving at the hotel 2 hours earlier and had been observed by 2 agents in the parking structure since 7:45. He had apparently received a text message in the last 4 minutes that had caused him to move toward his vehicle. The agents intercepted him between the elevator and his car in the fluorescent-lit concrete corridor 3 floors below the ballroom, where the gala was concluding its main event. I did not witness that arrest directly. Stephen told me about it later with the particular dry precision he brought to reporting facts. He found grimly satisfying. Thomas Greer had been holding his car keys when the agents reached him, which meant he had genuinely believed he was going to drive away. In the ballroom, Supervisor Walsh guided Nicole toward the main entrance with a professional courtesy that gave Nicole the dignity of walking out, rather than being escorted out, a distinction that mattered in a room full of people she had worked beside for 3 years. I watched Nicole walk the length of the ballroom floor between the parted crowd, her green dress bright under the chandelier light, her head up, her hands secured behind her back. She passed the cheese board Nicole had prepared, the champagne stations, the string quartet's empty chairs, the ice sculpture near the north wall, which had been melting slowly all evening and had lost the clean definition it had when the gala began. At the main entrance, she paused for one moment and looked back. Not at me, not at the stage. She looked at Daniel. He was standing 8 feet from the door, and he was looking at her with the expression of a man who has had something fundamental removed from the structure of his understanding and has not yet determined what will fill the space it left behind. His hands were at his sides. His face was the face of someone who had loved a person and was now in real time reconciling that fact with everything he now knew about who that person had been. Nicole held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then Supervisor Walsh moved forward gently, and Nicole turned away and walked through the doors and out of the Meridian Grand, and out of Whitmore and Associates, and out of the life she had constructed here, one careful, calculating step at a time for 3 years. The doors closed behind her. The chandelier hummed above the silent room. I stepped down from the stage. The ballroom emptied the way rooms empty after something significant has happened inside them. Not quickly. Not with the loud, relieved rush of a crowd that has been released from tension. Slowly, in the careful, subdued way of people who have witnessed something they will be thinking about for a long time and are not yet ready to return to the ordinary noise of their lives. Partners spoke to each other in low voices near the exits. A junior associate was crying quietly near the string quartet's empty chairs, and 2 of her colleagues were standing close to her in the particular way that young people stand close to each other when they do not know what to say but understand that proximity is itself a form of support. Stephen was at the edge of the stage, speaking quietly into his phone, already managing the legal aftermath with the methodical thoroughness that had made him indispensable to me for 30 years. I was not thinking about the legal aftermath. I was looking at Daniel. He had not moved from the spot where he had been standing when the ballroom doors closed behind Nicole. 8 feet from the main entrance in the middle of the now thinning crowd. Alone in the particular way that a person is alone when everyone around them can see that they are going through something private and instinctively gives them space. He was looking at the floor. His jacket was slightly rumpled. The left lapel turned inward, the way it did when he moved his arms without thinking about it, which he had done since he was a teenager, and which Clara had straightened affectionately every time she noticed it for 20 years. I had straightened it myself twice at his law school graduation. He had been embarrassed both times, and I had done it anyway because some habits survive everything they are supposed to survive, and some do not. I crossed the ballroom floor toward my son. The parquet was marked in 2 places near the stage with the faint outline of where the broken champagne glass had been swept by a hotel staff member who had moved through the room quietly during the arrest, with the professional discretion of someone trained to address minor physical problems without drawing attention to themselves, while larger ones were being resolved nearby. Daniel heard my footsteps and looked up. His face was the face of a man who had been crying and had stopped recently enough that the evidence was still visible in the redness along his lower eyelids and the slight puffiness at the corners of his eyes. He did not look away when we saw that I could see it. He had stopped hiding things from me, or perhaps he had simply run out of the energy that hiding things required. I stopped in front of him. We stood facing each other in the emptying ballroom, and I looked at my son the way I had looked at him the day he was born, with the particular compound of love and terror and profound responsibility that arrived with parenthood and never fully departed, regardless of how old the child became, or what they did or did not do with the years you had given them. He opened his mouth. "Dad," he said. His voice broke on the single syllable. He pressed his lips together and tried again. "Dad, I am so sorry. I am so sorry for everything. For the locks. For what I said to you about the house. For the things I let her say to you and the things I said myself." His throat worked hard. I knew something was wrong. I knew it for months. I just kept telling myself I was imagining it because it was easier than knowing I was not. I put my hand on his shoulder. He dropped his head forward and pressed his forehead against my collarbone, the way he had as a small boy when he was overwhelmed by something and needed to be close to something solid. He was 37 years old, and he was doing it again, and I held him the same way I had held him then, one hand on his shoulder and one on the back of his head. And I felt his shoulders shake twice with the effort of containing something that was too large for the space he was trying to keep it in. I let him contain it. I did not tell him it was all right. It was not all right. He knew that, and telling him otherwise would have been a kindness of the wrong kind, the kind that prioritizes the comfort of the moment over the honesty that recovery requires. After a moment, he straightened. He wiped his face with the back of his hand and took a long, uneven breath. "What do I do now?" he asked. I reached into my jacket's inner pocket. The document was 4 pages folded twice to fit the pocket. Stephen had prepared it 3 days ago at my request, using the standard California petition for dissolution of marriage. It was not a final decree. California law required a minimum waiting period of 6 months from the date of filing before a dissolution could be finalized, a provision the legislature had built into the process to prevent decisions made in the heat of crisis from becoming permanent before the person making them had time to be certain. It was, in my legal opinion, one of the more humane things the California Family Code had ever produced. What I was handing Daniel was the beginning of a legal process, not the end of a marriage. The marriage had ended at some point in the past 9 months. This was simply the paperwork that acknowledged it. I held it out to him. He looked at the folded pages in my hand without taking them. He looked at them the way you look at something you have known was coming and have not yet made peace with, even though you understand intellectually that making peace with it is the only available path forward. "She looked back at me," he said quietly. "When they walked her out, she looked back." "I know," I said. "I saw." "What do you think she was thinking?" I considered the question honestly the way he deserved. "I think," I said carefully, "that she was thinking about what she was losing. I am not certain she was thinking about what she had done to lose it. Those are different thoughts, and the first one does not require the second." I paused. "But I could be wrong. I have been wrong about people before." Daniel looked at the document again. Then he reached out and took it from my hand. He did not unfold it immediately. He held it at his side, looking at the floor between us, and I could see him absorbing the weight of it, the way people absorb the weight of real things when they finally allow themselves to hold them. "She told me once," he said almost to himself, "that the difference between a good attorney and a great one was the ability to know when a case was lost and file accordingly." He looked up at me. Something moved through his expression that was not quite a smile, but occupied the same general territory, the painful, complicated expression of a person finding dark irony in something that has hurt them badly and discovering that the irony does not actually make it hurt less. "I think," he said, "this might be that moment." I put my hand on his shoulder again and left it there. "Come home tonight," I said. "Your old room is exactly the way you left it." He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes bright and tired, and something else. Something that was just beginning to form in the way that things begin to form when the worst of something is over and there is finally enough space to consider what comes next. "Okay," he said quietly. "The law moves at its own pace, and it is never the pace that the people involved prefer." I had spent 40 years understanding this, and another 10 pretending I had left it behind. The federal case against Nicole Hargrove, Ryan Calloway, and Thomas Greer was filed within 72 hours of the gala. The documentation Chloe and Stephen had assembled was by the assessment of the lead prosecutor from the United States Attorney's Office for the Central District of California, among the most comprehensively prepared pre-filing packages her office had received in 11 years of practice. She said this to Stephen on the phone, and Stephen relayed it to me with the particular quiet satisfaction of a man who has done something very well and does not need to say so directly. The plea negotiations began 6 weeks later. Nicole's attorneys, a firm from Century City that specialized in white-collar criminal defense, reviewed the evidence package and advised their client with the same brutal honesty that good defense attorneys owe their clients regardless of what the client wants to hear. The digital metadata was irrefutable. The bank records were certified. The forensic soil analysis was admissible. The camera footage had been collected from Arthur Whitmore's own property by Arthur Whitmore himself, which eliminated any Fourth Amendment challenge. The signature card placing Ryan Calloway as the second authorized signatory on the Pacific Meridian account was a primary source document that no amount of creative argumentation would render ambiguous. Nicole accepted a plea agreement in the 8th week. Wire fraud, breach of charitable trust, fraudulent alteration of a legal instrument with elder abuse enhancements. The sentencing guidelines applied to the aggregate conduct and the specific enhancement factors produced a recommended range that the judge accepted with minimal deviation. Nicole Hargrove was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison with eligibility for supervised release after serving 85% of the term, a provision of federal sentencing law that her attorneys had negotiated hard to preserve, and that the prosecutor had agreed to in exchange for Nicole's full cooperation in the case against Thomas Greer. Ryan Calloway entered a separate plea 2 weeks after Nicole. His cooperation had been more immediate and more comprehensive, a calculation his attorneys had made correctly in the first week after the arrest. His sentence was lighter. 7 years with the same supervised release provision. The California State Bar initiated disbarment proceedings the day after his conviction, a process that moved considerably faster than the criminal case and concluded with the permanent revocation of his license to practice law before the criminal sentence had even begun. Thomas Greer, Nicole's cousin and the registered manager of Pacific Meridian Consulting, accepted a plea agreement that included substantial cooperation with both the federal prosecutors and the IRS, which had opened its own investigation into the shell company's tax filings within 3 weeks of the initial arrest. He received 4 years of supervised probation and a financial penalty calibrated to the amount he had personally received from the scheme. He would not go to prison, but he would spend the next 4 years with a federal probation officer, reviewing every significant financial transaction he made. The civil recovery process moved alongside the criminal proceedings. Mrs. Margaret Kellerman's estate documents were restored to their original form within a week of the gala, with a formal letter of apology from the firm and a complete waiver of fees for the remainder of the estate administration. Margaret Kellerman, when Stephen called to explain what had happened and what was being done about it, listened to the entire explanation without interrupting. When he finished, she said that she had chosen Whitmore and Associates 30 years ago because Arthur Whitmore had a reputation for doing things correctly, and that she was glad to know the reputation was still deserved. Stephen told me this, and I did not say anything for a moment. Then I said that I would like to send her flowers. Stephen said he thought that was a good idea. The Whitmore Family Charitable Foundation recovered the $63,400 through a civil judgment against the Pacific Meridian account, which the federal authorities had frozen as part of the asset seizure. The recovery was complete within 4 months. Stephen suggested a board meeting to discuss the foundation's governance procedures and implement additional oversight mechanisms that would prevent a similar breach in the future. I told him to schedule it for January. The firm itself required more sustained attention. I did not return to the corner office. I had not wanted the corner office for 10 years, and the events of the past few months had not changed that. What I wanted was to make certain that the people who worked inside this institution understood what it stood for and felt the organizational support to act accordingly. Stephen and I spent 3 weeks in the conference room on 14, reviewing every active client matter, every personnel file, and every internal procedure that Nicole and Ryan had touched during their time at the firm. We made changes where changes were needed and left things alone where they were working correctly. I appointed a new managing partner in the 2nd week of December. Her name was Caroline Briggs. She had been with the firm for 19 years, had built the estate planning practice from 4 attorneys to 22, and had a reputation among her colleagues for being the person you went to when you needed someone to tell you the truth about a difficult situation, rather than the version of the truth that was easiest to hear. She reminded me in certain ways of Clara. I told her that when I offered her the position, and she looked at me for a long moment across the conference room table and said that she would accept on one condition. I asked what the condition was. She said that she wanted my phone number. The real one, not the general inquiry line. She said that if she ever encountered a situation she genuinely did not know how to navigate, she wanted to be able to call the person who built this firm and ask him directly. I gave her the number. Daniel came home the night of the gala and stayed for 6 weeks. He slept in his old room, which was exactly as I had told him it would be, because I had not changed it in the years since he left for college, and had not changed it in the years since he married Nicole, and had not changed it in the months since she had begun systematically dismantling everything she could reach. Some rooms you leave alone because you understand at a level below conscious decision-making that the person who belongs in them may need to return. He filed the dissolution petition on a Monday morning in the 3rd week of December, walking into the Superior Court Clerk's office in downtown Los Angeles with the 4-page document Stephen had prepared and a certified check for the filing fee. He called me from the courthouse steps afterward. He did not say anything significant. He told me the clerk had been friendly and that the parking near the courthouse was worse than he remembered, and that he was going to stop for coffee on the way back. I told him to drive safely. He said he would. That was enough. That was in fact exactly enough. The Eleanor cutting had put out its first new growth on a Thursday morning, 11 days after I replanted it. I had been checking every day since the replanting the way you check on something you care about when it has been through something difficult, and you are not yet certain how it is going to come through on the other side. The new growth was small. 2 pale green shoots emerging from the junction, where the main stem met the first lateral branch, each one no longer than my thumbnail, each one the particular yellow-green of plant tissue that has not yet had enough light to develop its full color. I crouched down in the December morning air and looked at them for a long time. The south garden was quiet around me. The California winter light was thin and silver at this hour, coming in low across the roof lines of the neighboring houses and laying itself flat across the garden beds in long, pale rectangles. The air smelled of damp soil and eucalyptus and the faint, clean cold that arrived in this part of Los Angeles on December mornings and was gone by 10 o'clock, burned away by the sun with the cheerful efficiency of a place that did not take winter entirely seriously. I heard the back door open behind me. Daniel came down the porch steps in an old sweatshirt that had belonged to him in college, and a pair of work pants he had borrowed from my closet the previous weekend, because he had not brought clothes suited to garden work when he came home the night of the gala, and had not yet gotten around to retrieving more from the house he and Nicole had shared. The house was in the process of being assessed as part of the civil recovery proceedings. He was not in a hurry to go back to it. He was carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He handed one to me without speaking and crouched down beside me at the dirt, his elbows resting on his knees, his eyes on the Eleanor cutting with the focused, quiet attention of someone who had been told the story of this plant and understood why it mattered. We stayed like that for a while. The coffee was strong and slightly too hot, the way I had always made it a habit Daniel had complained about every morning of his childhood, and had apparently not outgrown his affection for, despite the complaints, because he was drinking his without comment. "She is coming back," he said, finally nodding toward the 2 pale shoots. "She is," I said. He wrapped both hands around his mug and looked at the plant for another moment. "Dad," he said, "can I ask you something?" "Yes," I said. "Did you know?" He turned his head to look at me. His face in the morning light was tired and honest in the way that faces are honest when a person has recently been through something that stripped away the energy required to present anything other than what they actually are. Did you know from the beginning that it was going to end the way it did? From the first time you met her, I thought about the question with the seriousness it deserved. I thought about Nicole walking past me in the driveway 9 months ago, looking through me the way you look through furniture. I thought about the battered copy of the California Rules of Professional Conduct mounted on the wall beside the conference room door, and the way Clara had laughed when I installed it. I thought about the catalog on Clara's nightstand, with the corner folded down for 3 weeks before she finally ordered the Eleanor cutting, and the way she had talked to it the whole drive home, because she said new plants needed to hear a human voice to understand they were somewhere safe. I thought about a young man in a janitor's closet of an office in downtown Los Angeles 35 years ago, with one desk and one telephone, and the absolute conviction that the law practiced with integrity could change a person's life. No, I said honestly. I knew something was wrong. I did not know how wrong or how far it would go. People surprise you? Unfortunately, they surprise you in both directions. Daniel nodded slowly. I should have seen it sooner, he said. Yes, I said. You should have. He looked at me, startled slightly by the directness of it. But you did not see it, I said, because you were trying to love someone, and loving someone involves a specific kind of willful blindness that is not always a weakness. Sometimes it is simply the cost of the attempt. The problem was not that you loved her. The problem was that she knew you loved her and used it against you. I picked up the small trowel beside my knee and turned it over in my hands. That is her failure, not yours. Daniel looked at the trowel. Then he looked at the Eleanor cutting. Then he looked at me. Show me what to do, he said. With the garden, he said. Show me what to do. I want to learn. I handed him the trowel. I talked him through the preparation of the bed alongside the south fence, the 3 plants that had not survived Nicole's herbicide and needed to be cleared before replacement cuttings could be established. I showed him how to work the soil without compacting it, how to test moisture with 2 fingers pressed to the second knuckle, how to tell the difference between root damage that was recoverable and root damage that was not. He was not skilled at any of it yet. He worked too fast at first, then overcorrected and worked too slowly. He asked questions that revealed he was starting from the absolute beginning, with no prior knowledge and no pretense of having any. He made mistakes and asked what he had done wrong, and listened carefully to the answer, and tried again. It was, I thought, a reasonable way to begin. We worked through the morning without hurrying. The December sun came up over the rooflines and warmed the garden by degrees, the light shifting from silver to pale gold as the hours moved. At some point, Daniel took off the college sweatshirt and draped it over the garden bench and worked in his undershirt, his forearms darkening with soil to the elbow the way mine had for 30 years. I watched my son work the earth beside me and thought about Clara. I thought about the way she had moved through a garden with the patient, attending focus of a person who understood that growing things required presence rather than urgency. I thought about the Sunday mornings she had wound the music box and the way the Chopin had moved through the house 8 bars at a time, regular as a heartbeat. I thought about all of it without grief, which was something that had taken 10 years to arrive at, and which I understood without needing to examine it closely, was a form of gratitude rather than a form of forgetting. By noon, the 3 damaged beds had been cleared, and the new cuttings established in their places along the south fence. Daniel sat back on his heels and looked at the row of small, pale plants in the fresh, dark soil. How long before they look like something? He asked. Spring, I said. If we take care of them. He nodded. The afternoon light was beginning to come in from the west. Warm and horizontal, the kind of light that arrives in December in Southern California and makes the garden look for an hour or so like the most specific and irreplaceable place in the world. I reached over and straightened the left lapel of the sweatshirt on the bench beside us. Old habits. Daniel saw me do it. He did not say anything. He picked up his coffee mug from the ground beside him, found it cold, and drank it anyway. We sat in the afternoon light together in the garden Clara had made, and did not need to fill the quiet with anything at all. This has been my family story, and I will be honest with you, I am not proud of every chapter of it. I stayed quiet too long. I watched the damage happen when I could have spoken sooner. If this grandpa story has given you anything, let it be this: do not wait until the foundation is crumbling to protect the people you love. Speak up. Show up. Before the storm, not after. My personal belief: greed is not ambition. It is fear dressed in expensive clothing. And I have learned after 68 years that God does not forget what is done in the dark. The truth has a way of surviving everything built to bury it. A title does not make a person. Character is what remains when everything else is stripped away. These grandpa stories are never just about money or courtrooms. These family stories are about what love looks like when it refuses to quit. And these grandpa stories remind us that patience, real patience, is not weakness. It is the sharpest weapon a person can carry. If this family story reached you, share it with someone who needs it. Drop a word in the comments. I read them all. Subscribe and stay with us. Thank you for staying until the very last word. And a gentle note: some stories ahead blend fact with fiction, shaped for reflection and meaning. If that is not your preference, we honor that. Completely find what feeds your heart elsewhere.